Hello, welcome to the Middle East Forum's webinar and podcast series. I'm Cliff Smith, the Washington Project Director of the Middle East Forum, and I am pleased today to be here with Endy Zemenides of the Hellenic American Leadership Council, or HALC. It's a leading Greek America grassroots lobbying organization, activist organization, and Middle East Forum has been worked closely with HALC for a number of years under issues concerning Turkey, Greece, and the wider Middle East, and to better understand some of these complicated events that have been going on recently with Greece, with Turkey, and the implications for the U.S., its allies, are vast. And to sort of just have a catch-up on these issues and discuss where they are, we thought it'd be great to have Endy on board. I'm sure we'll have a ton to talk about. Anyhow, welcome, Endy.
Thanks, Cliff. Good to be with you.
Right. Per usual, we will talk for about 20 minutes, and then we will take questions from the audience. So during our talk, feel free to type questions into the Q&A box, and we'll get to as many as practical. Anyway, Endy, for starters, something that everybody knows is that Erdogan was just reelected to another 5-year term. Of course, there are serious questions about the fairness of this election, to put it mildly, but it remains a reality. What position does this put Erdogan in, both domestically and internationally, and what does it mean for America and its allies?
So I actually don't think there's any question about the fairness of the election, just the freeness. It was certainly not a fair election. If you look at, he controlled all the media. He had purged his opponents. He kept leaders of parties in jail. But as I think we agree, there's a free and fair election. Unfortunately, I also think the opposition blew its best chance, and that's a separate issue on why it did, and Erdogan did not necessarily have to steal it on election day.
Yeah.
But in terms of what position does that put Erdogan in, the world is looking at him and say we have to deal with it for the next 5 years. And it also makes him a player without any political ramifications, or at least short-term political ramifications, in the Russia-Ukraine war, in the grain deal, in NATO expansion, and other developments. Whereas, if he was playing hardliner under different circumstances where there could be political or electoral repercussions, maybe the world would take a different lean in differently when it came to defying Erdogan. But now people have to figure out a policy. If we did this, which we did, we had conversations like this a year ago. I think people were trying to figure out a policy until they figured out who the next leader of Turkey was. Now people are trying to figure out how do they deal with Ankara and an Erdogan regime for the next 5 years.
Yeah. You alluded to one of the things I was going to ask next, and that is, since his re-election, he seems to have done an about-face on NATO expansion, aka admitting Sweden to NATO. Why has he done this? What does the timing mean? Does he have an end game? Does he have another goal in mind? I mean, it was a very sudden turnaround given what he had been doing in the previous months. So you have a take on that?
So interestingly enough, I don't think the turnaround came suddenly upon his reelection. If you recall, Sunday, the Sunday evening before Vilnius, he had a call with President Biden. Mm-hmm. Now, I think this is a little bit insider baseball-ish, but given that Biden was going to meet with Erdogan at Vilnius anyway, 2 days or 3 days later, to have that call at that moment, the president's staff must have sent him on that call to say, we've cinched a deal, go do a congratulatory call and say that. And in moment number one, Erdogan put new conditions. He opened the call with, no, we're not ready for Sweden. Sweden's not ready. I can't put this in my parliament. And by the way, I want something new. I want your support for EU accession negotiations. Now, I wrote about this in Greece this weekend, but ironically, the next morning in Axios, the lead story was about the president's famous temper towards staffers. how often he uses the "get the F out of here" or "how the F didn't you know this," and that staffers tried to avoid meeting with the president alone for that reason. I can imagine that after a call in which he was probably prepped to say congratulations, thank you, look forward to seeing you at Vilnius, that his reaction was harsh. And we have sources that tell us that there was a lot of internal finger pointing. I can only speculate why in less than 24 hours there was a turnaround, but I'm pretty sure, I think it's a safe bet to say, whether it was Ambassador Flake or somebody in the State Department National Security Council, they called their Turkish their counterparts and told them, you know what, your meeting in Vilnius is going to be canceled. You know what, we're not even going to talk to Congress about the F-16s. The or else started to take shape. And because the tone from that Sunday call, and it was widely reported so people can look it up, the tone and the substance of that Sunday call to go into Monday, which, yes, with by the way, with zero new concessions, was quite telling.
Mm-hmm. On that issue, you mentioned F-16s. Turkey's quest for advanced F-16s after getting kicked out of the F-35 program has been an issue that Middle East Forum and Hulk have been involved with for years. And it came up again. And recently, in an article in the Washington Post a few days ago, Senator Bob Menendez, who previously had been a bulwark against this deal, had said that if there has been a lull in Turkey's belligerence against Greece, and if they can show me a pathway where Greece is a qualitative military edge, then maybe there's a pathway forward. Congressman Michael, and Bob Menendez, being a Democrat, Chairman McCall of the House Foreign Affairs Committee took a very similar stance in the same article. Where does this issue stand right now?
Well, right now, nowhere, right? Because Turkey has not yet approved Sweden, and all four of the four corners, the chairs and ranking members of the Senate and respective Senate and House Foreign Relations Committees or Foreign Affairs Committee in the House, maintain a hold. And they've all made clear that this hold does not get lifted until Sweden is in. Turkey is trying to reverse the sequence, give us F-16s, and then Sweden is in. I just don't think they got that type of credibility in Washington, especially in Congress, any longer. So it looks like a very big picture goal. And as you said, our advocacy or our joint advocacy and analysis of the F-16 issue was never punitive towards Turkey. Let's deny them every weapon. It was a way to change behavior. We also took the line that them behaving exactly the way they should in terms of Sweden's accession should not be cause for reward. Sweden has made its own concessions in terms of, and frankly, I think some unjustifiable concessions, but in terms of what freedoms they allow Kurds and Kurdish expatriates in Sweden. So that should have been enough for Turkey, but Turkey decided that they're going to play the blackmail game in NATO. Where it stands right now, we'll see when Turkey takes Sweden's accession and approves Sweden, and not only holds a vote, but I think there's some concern that Erdogan and Orban may be playing a game. So the position is that we want Sweden effectively in. That means the final instruments of approval from both Turkey and Hungary to be in Brussels for filing. So Sweden is, for all intents and purposes, a member of NATO. That will kick off the discussion. I think everybody sees, and this is why your comments from Senator Menendez and Representative McCall and Representative Meeks has been quite explicit here too, that the deal is Sweden is in, number one. Turkey backs off from its belligerence against Greece, right? Because they're trying to keep it. Our joint advocacy has raised a host of issues, but I think for where the policy discussion is right now they're trying to keep it inter-NATO considerations, and that's why Turkey's belligerence against our Kurdish partners in the anti-ISIS coalition is not front and center. Turkey's continued occupation of Cyprus or Turkey's lending of its F-16s to Azerbaijan for belligerence in the Caucasus and specifically against Artsakh were not part of this particular NATO-focused conversation. But what the U.S. decided to show is that NATO stability, and if you recall the State Department's rationale for pursuing F-16 sales, was in the interest of NATO unity. Well, NATO unity cannot be just on western borders and not on southeastern borders. So the question of preventing active conflict between Turkey and Greece has become front and center, as important as Finland and Sweden. And Congress will only move to release a hold when there are sufficient assurances that these F-16s cannot be used in such a way. And by the way, that message was finally clearly given to Erdogan, because you saw Erdogan in Vilnius almost disingenuously say, we've never used F-16s against Greece, which we know they have, and we will never do that again, right? So at least the message is coming through. But nobody's just going to trust Erdogan's good word. So those guarantees are going to somehow have to be memorialized in whatever the State Department approves. And then there will be a part two, which is Greece's deterrent factor. And, when we're sitting there and thinking that a few years ago, Turkey was looking at perhaps a fleet of 100 F-35s, and instead, we're looking at a situation where it has 80 upgraded F-16s. Well, Greece is already getting the 80 upgraded F-16s. Turkey is getting 40 new F-16s. Well, Greece will get 40 new F-35s. And on top of it all, Greece got 24 Rafales. So Greece's qualitative military edge. And by the way, if we know the production schedule, this is why Turkey's delay on Swedish accession is very important, because if you look at people who really know the defense trade, foreign military sales, they'll tell you if Turkey closed a deal today, their new F-16s probably wouldn't arrive until 2029. So, and the deal clearly is not being closed today. So Turkey is looking down, if it keeps intransigence going, is looking at a situation where it may have both a qualitative and at least in the short term, a quantitative disadvantage.
Mm-hmm. It's a big issue, a lot going on. One other thing, recently in the news, there has been much made of the fact that purportedly Turkey and Greece said they want to reset their relationship. I admit I remember language like this being aimed at the Russians from the US in 2009, and it didn't turn out so well. Is this different? Why or why not?
So it is a little different because the conversations have been going on for a while. And as you know, it's always Turkey pulling back. They have a good conversation and then Turkey something wild. And and Erdogan is always, he lies about why the reasons for tensions come about. So, for example, throughout 2022, the second half of 2022, especially into the first month of 2023, when we had record Turkish incursions and violations of Greek airspace, Erdogan tried to blame it on the Greek prime minister, saying his speech in Congress, annoyed me. Whereas if you just if you took by the numbers and took the 4 months before the prime minister's speech and compared them to the same time period 1 year earlier, you would have seen that Turkey had started its provocations and its tension escalation ahead of time. Beyond that, let's just look at what's happened the last few months. Turkey had an earthquake, as we know, a horrific earthquake, tragic earthquake. Greece came to its aid right away. And overflights, stopped, which shows us that these overflights are really, and these violations of Greek airspace are a matter of policy. Greece has been always open to talks. There have been, since the early 2000s, there have been, we are in 60 rounds of exploratory talks on delineating the maritime shelf. Greece's position has not changed. We'd like to have an agreement with Turkey on delineating our our continental shelf, our maritime zones, which include both the territorial waters and exclusive economic zones. Greece obviously is a signatory to the international law of the sea. Turkey is not. So Turkey makes up, what it recognizes, what it doesn't. So, for example, it likes applying international law in the Black Sea, but it doesn't in the Eastern Mediterranean or the Aegean. Turkey has this inexplicable and baseless legally positioned that islands cannot have their own maritime zones, whereas international law says exactly the opposite. But everybody kind of knows where the parameters of a solution are. Greece is, and if you look at Greece's behavior, especially in the last 5 years or so, where they had kind of open issues with Italy, they negotiated an EEZ. They had open issues with Egypt, negotiated an EEZ. Where they had open issues with Albania and they couldn't come to a negotiation, they jointly submitted to the International Court of Justice to have it settled for them. So Turkey is very much the one problem here. Do we take Erdogan for his word that he wants a reset? His economic needs are pretty massive. This is one of the reasons he put the EU back on the table. And he knows that if he has this perpetual state of tension with Greece and Cyprus, by the way, because they both hold vetoes in Brussels, he will not do what he needs from the EU. And he needs it more than ever because his assumptions that his reelection would have created a market bump, that his appointment of his new finance minister, Şimşek, would have given him a bump, that some type of raise in interest rates, where he raised them to 15%, even though markets were expecting 25%, would have given him a bump. His economy is in a tailspin. He has pretty big debt payments coming up at the end of this year. He hasn't missed a debt payment yet, but the biggest ones are coming up. And you're seeing him already selling assets for pennies on the dollar to Qatar and UAE. And he's going to run out of these short-term options in a bit. He really needs some type of special agreement with the EU. He's saying he wants EU membership. I don't think he does. He doesn't want the responsibilities of an EU member. He wants just the rights. But to get to any special type of an enhanced customs union or what we would understand a NAFTA kind of plus agreement, he won't get to if he doesn't come to an understanding and a permanent de-escalation, or at least a lasting de-escalation with Greece and Cyprus.
You alluded to this in this last thing, but you want to talk a little bit more about Turkey's prospects and the meaning of their overtures to the EU?
Yeah, they're obviously making maximalist demands because they know Sweden, which, by the way, Sweden has always been a cheerleader for Turkey's EU accession. So he thinks he can get Sweden to push a little more. Again, I don't think he's sincere about full EU accession, because that would create all kinds of legal changes in Turkey that would break his kleptocracy. He could not get away with what he's doing to Osman Kavala and to others. He could not get away with his control of the economy if he were a full EU member. So I think his real play here is to get an enhanced customs union and some type of visa liberalization for Turks to travel within the Schengen area. Now, even this enhanced customs union would be a problem for him because he would have to make some changes on behalf of the rule of law, and particularly change his purchasing law, which doesn't seem that he's in the mood to do, because like Vladimir Putin, Erdogan directs he makes sure all the economic benefits go to his most favored cronies. So whether he thinks he has this moment of heightened leverage that he can get the EU to either bend on its rules or create some unique type of economic relationship with Turkey, that remains to be seen. But with the state of the law, the rule of law in Turkey today, with the state of his economic cronyism, Turkey right now is a kleptocracy, and with his tensions against two veto-holding EU members, Greece and Cyprus, which, by the way, they weren't the reasons the negotiations broke off in the first place. It was Germany and France. So I'm not sure there are a lot of people in Europe who want to give visa liberalization. If you think about the timeline, that by the time Turkey gets visa liberalization or full membership, which would allow the free movement, Turkey could be the largest country in Europe by population in there. So think about how all of Europe has revolted against migration, how Brexit came in large part because EU citizens from Poland and Romania were moving into the UK, and a lot of people use that as a negative. Now imagine 88 million citizens of Erdogan's Turkey being able to freely run around Europe. I think he has a lot of hurdles in front of him.
All right, let's get to audience questions now. Let's see. We'll start with one from Larry White. He says, do you see Greece and Turkey settling the issue of national waters in the Aegean Sea?
Yeah, well, again, what I believe is that the parameters of a solution are there, and that solution would be, if it was negotiated, it would be like in the Western Aegean, closest to the Greek mainland, you would have full rights under the international law of the sea, and they would probably go down, or the territorial waters would be decreased as you get closer to Turkey. Absent that type of negotiation, then there would be a referral to the International Court of Justice. If Turkey doesn't want to play along in either case, and remember, over the last few years, Turkey is saying, well, for us to go to the International Court of Justice, we want to open other issues like the Treaty of Lausanne or the status of the Muslim minority in Thrace. Greece is not going to do that. Turkey has tried to raise issues of sovereignty of inhabited Greek islands. That's a red line. That will never happen. So if Turkey wants to focus on maritime zones and continental shelf issues, yeah, a solution can be had.
Yeah. David Levine says, Erdogan appears to be making friendly overtures towards Israel after years of hostility. What do you think his motives are?
Yeah, well, that's been going on for about 18 months. He started really with Lapid, and then he kept going with Netanyahu. His motives are twofold. First, he knows he cannot have constant tension with Jerusalem for a couple of reasons. One is security based, and the second one is the energy equation. That if if he doesn't have at least one friend, okay, and if you think about the biggest energy players in the Eastern Mediterranean right now, we're talking about Greece, Cyprus, Israel, and Egypt, right? Well, doesn't look like he's going to make up with Egypt anytime soon. Greece and Cyprus, those are significant obstacles in terms of what he has to settle with them. So he figures the least amount of obstacles are with Israel, and kind of the longest standing or the longest history of commercial relations. Is it going well? There's a lot of talk, but remember, Erdogan still shelters Hamas. Erdogan still, in some cases, is on the opposite end of Israel in Syria. Erdogan has cooperated with Iran. So Israel will keep talking. I think Israel is looking for a workable relationship with Ankara, but it'll never get back to a loving relationship. Israel considers Erdogan probably the godfather of the Muslim Brotherhood, in not more than the godfather, but just the leader of the Muslim Brotherhood today in the Middle East. And unless Erdogan changes his orientation that way, they'll never get back to where they were in the 1990s.
This actually goes to another question that an anonymous attendee is asking, and that is, what is Erdogan's current standing with the Arab nations and with radical Islamist movements such as the Muslim Brotherhood? I mean, I think you're certainly right that he's close to many different radical Islamist movements. What about his standing with the Gulf?
Well, so the first and probably most important barometer on this front will be whether and how far his rapprochement with Egypt goes. Obviously, President Sisi deposed the Muslim Brotherhood, Morsi, and it became a personal issue at some point between him and Erdogan. You're seeing Erdogan try to effectuate some rapprochement with Egypt there. Egypt will have very stringent conditions when it comes to Erdogan's sheltering and sponsoring of the Muslim Brotherhood. So if that rapprochement advances, you're probably counting on less support for the Muslim Brotherhood. If it stays frozen or goes or breaks off, that probably means he's not willing to sacrifice the Muslim Brotherhood. In terms of the Gulf, there's an interesting, it's a different dynamic there, because if we recall, when the other Gulf nations blockaded Qatar, Erdogan sent the military there. Erdogan saved him. So Qatar has been paying him back with economic lifelines. But now we've seen, especially the UAE of late, buying up assets, extending some economic help. We've seen a thaw in what was a Cold War between Turkey and Saudi Arabia after the Khashoggi killing. But it looks now like the other GCC countries may see an opening to break Erdogan off of Qatar. They want to take one problem at a time. They figure they'll take him down, and then they can try to control Erdogan. But Erdogan's going to be selling a lot of assets on the cheap to the GCC countries.
I have one last question. How does Erdogan's revived interest in the EU sit with Erdogan's nationalist supporters, and does it affect his sort of domestic political goals, I suppose?
Yeah, if he was sincere about it, and if he would move like Turkey did in the early 2000s to start complying with the acquis, it would absolutely affect his nationalist supporters. Because there would be human rights standards and rule of law standards that all of a sudden Turkey would have to comply with. That does not look that Erdogan has any intention whatsoever to complying with. I mean, in fact, he's probably closer to infringement proceedings in another Europe institution, the Council of Europe, for his sham prosecutions of Osman Kavala and Demirtas, than he is to EU membership. So, as I said before, as I described before, I think his play here is that's his, he's setting the goalposts, or he's setting a negotiating tactic. It's always very important that, unfortunately, for 30 years, we've learned here in America, our negotiation tactics are based on the book Getting to Yes, where you start with a real reasonable position here. You look for win-wins. That's not how Turkey, or I don't believe anybody in the Middle East or probably in the world, negotiates that way. He put out a maximalist position, and to try to shift the goalpost or the center of gravity in terms of whatever negotiations may come from, so he can settle on what it is he really wants, which is some type of enhanced special economic relationship that may be even unique to Turkey.
All right. Well, I wish we had more time, but we are already over time. So thank you very much for joining. Tune in later on for more. But thank you very much, Endy, for this insightful conversation, and look forward to talking with you more in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.